Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. It's August 9th. It's a Monday morning. And I'm with Neil Kitchings, and this is a sizzle, 1 minute sizzle reel to tell you what this episode is going to be about. I probably need an hour sizzle reel to tell you what it's about because it's intense. Neil is the author. By the way, this is live from Glasgow, Scotland. And Neil is the author of Carbon Choices. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And it's part of a little bit of a series that I'm doing to alert the world, the world on TikTok that there's more to dancing, and it's observing what's going on in the world. I've begun interviewing some of the most amazing climate environmentalists, of which Neil is one, and again, we're going to talk soon. But last night, I interviewed Sean Weinstein, who's writing Morning Dove, maybe one of the scariest books ever written, which you all should read, fiction. I'm going to be interviewing Kevin Albin, who wrote Stone Child. That's going to happen next week, and he's in Paris. Last week I did interview Alan Hess, who's the author of the Captain Polo series. This is good stuff. This is living, and it's tomorrow, and it's so important. And I am so thrilled to be with Neil from Glasgow right now. And that's the end of the sizzle reel. We're done with that, and it's time for me to introduce Neil. But one comment, and Neil and I were just talking about this. I've been reading this, and not ever, and I mentioned this to Neil, not ever before in my septuagenarian age, which means in my 7 decades here on Earth, have I read a book that required me to take notes on every sentence, until I finally got to a point last night. I said, oh, this is ridiculous. I can't take notes on every sentence. That's what's in here, and the power of every sentence that you wrote. So, Neil, I'm so thrilled you're here, and I can't thank you enough for your time, because I know you got a lot of stuff on your plate, and it's also evening in Scotland now. So, how about a little bio, and tell a little bit about yourself and the change you made in careers, etc. Take it away, Neil.
Thank you, Calvin, and yes, it's great to be here. So yes, I live in central Scotland on the edge of the Highlands and the more urban lowlands, so I've always enjoyed going into the countryside and enjoying nature, and that's probably what made me go on and do a geography degree at university, which was something I really enjoyed. I then came out as a graduate geographer, and this is going back 35 years ago, and there was no jobs available in relation to geography. So rather strangely, I ended up becoming an accountant, working in London and then in Sheffield in England, and worked away busily as an accountant for 20 years, but never fully enjoying the work, just kind of doing it and getting on the career ladder, and always feeling that a bit empty, just something missing out there. Because I knew about climate change, I knew there was a slow burning crisis heading our way, and I was working in business, I was working with very clever people, but nobody was interested in climate change, and nobody was doing anything about climate change. So yes, I then had a bit of a midlife career crisis, and after a lot of soul searching and a lot of job hunting and a few extra courses, I did manage to change career from accountant to sustainable development policy work. That did involve a big pay cut, but no regrets, because I've really enjoyed doing this work. I now work as an energy specialist with Scottish Enterprise. Mm-hmm. So that's the Economic Development Agency, helping companies with to grow, and the focus I work on is energy and water technologies.
Okay. One quick comment. I'm going to keep showing this. This is available on Amazon, and all the information will be on the bottom of the screen. but it's available on Amazon. I got it in a day, and I started plunging into it. So ultimately, why did you take this time and energy? And this is and it's funny because there's some of the things. I mean, it was like almost written yesterday, not quite, but this is so contemporary. Why did you ultimately take this energy to write a book, Carbon Choices?
I knew so much about climate change going back to my university degree when I learnt about the ice sheets and how sensitive they are to changing climate. And, I was taught then that if we keep on pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we're going to come to a catastrophe. And as I say, I'm working in business and nobody was doing anything about it. So really, why did I write the book? Just out of complete frustration that so many people around me didn't seem to know much about climate change. And in a way, that's not surprising. Most of us weren't taught about climate change at school. I was unusual in learning about it at university. So people who are in positions of power today, all the politicians, all the managers, business leaders, school teachers, weren't really taught about climate change at school. So there's a huge gap there. So the purpose of my book is to try and fill that gap. It's designed to be an easy to read guide to climate change. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of books out there written by academic professors and they have their role. But mine is more down to earth and contains an action plan and is much easier to understand.
Which I have to accentuate. I'm not a big fan of reading about science. I do have a science background, but it's just everyday conversation the way you write it, which kind of grabs me. You kind of just alluded to it. It's kind of painful how many people aren't aware of climate change. They're correct.
Yes.
There's just too few people who are really completely fully aware. And I think we discussed this before we went on air. There are just armies of young people, who are busy dancing on TikTok, not to make fun, but there's another world out there, and it's climate change.
I think the problem is people get so many messages from social media, and it can be very biased, or people kind of get like for like, and they're not hearing a balanced view about the climate. So again, yes, I'm trying to fill that gap.
Yeah, because there's a lot of motivation for folks out there who have own cattle and are in the beef industry or make hamburgers, who are very business oriented to keep climate change far away because it cuts into their bottom line. It's all money.
Mm.
There are a lot of books on climate change. What makes this, and we just discussed it, what makes it so unique is it's written in such easy to understand terms.
Yeah, I think there's three things there. It's written in plain English, easy to understand, but it's still very full of facts. And as I was writing each chapter, I got a colleague to check the chapter for factual accuracy. So these are colleagues who are experts in their field. A lot of them are academics. So it's been fact checked and is very thorough. So yes, it's sorry, the third area I was going to mention is it also covers nature. So I think the climate crisis and our biodiversity or nature crisis are really intermixed. So in the book, I've covered the nature loss, the destruction of nature, and some of the solutions around rewilding and trying to recreate some of the nature that we've lost.
It's almost propitious that this morning, about an hour before you and I met here on Zoom, you saw it, too, that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued some very dire warnings, which makes the reading of this even more more critical in a sense. On this, our time together is not to promote this, but it's to promote the words and the ideas. Just more people need to know. What is the, in your opinion, part of the cause of all our problems? Is it overpopulation, overconsumption? It's just the way we live. What is the cause of all this?
There are multiple causes. I mean, clearly it's the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas, and but also agriculture and land use change that are a big impact on our climate. So the food that we eat is important. But the underlying causes, population growth certainly doesn't help. But I don't see that as the main problem. The average person in the United Kingdom emits over 100 times the carbon emissions of somebody in Malawi. And then the average American would be double the average Briton. So that's 200 times. So we can't really blame population growth in some of these low income countries. So really it's all down to our massive consumption. And it's just been an exponential growth during the 20th century in the West. And now it's exponential growth in huge countries like China, who are trying to follow what we've done. And it's that that's causing the problem. We just consume so much stuff and more stuff. So it's plastic, it's oil, it's electronic equipment that we keep for 6 months and then throw into landfill and buy new equipment. And all of that requires extraction of Earth's resources. So that to me is the issue. And in a way that's much easier to solve than population growth. We can choose to change our consumption. We can consume more wisely, we can consume more carefully, we can buy secondhand. Manufacturers could produce things that last a lot longer, and it just needs government regulation and businesses to work together on that. So I think there is so much that could be done, but we're not doing enough.
We're not doing enough. I read so much interesting. Like I said, I took so many notes that I had asked Neil if after this little interviews we could talk about some of my notes, and it is overwhelming, and that's why I've asked Neil to come back, so that when I finish Carbon Choices, we can go back and talk about some of the pages of notes that I have here to talk about, to bring it even into more practical terms. You know, the electric cars, you said such interesting things about that, and batteries that are so much more efficient. But anyway, move along. You did mention in here 10 building blocks. What do you mean by that?
So I think at the moment it's quite difficult for businesses and individuals to go green, if that's the right term, because there's so many things that act against it. So that, you know, the cost of going green can be more expensive. It can be more difficult to buy green products. And there's a bit of peer pressure that sometimes even acts against going green. So to me, we need to get all these kind of societal things right first. So I came up with these 10 building blocks. So that's things like sensible economics. So getting our taxes lined up, our subsidies to subsidize good things, to get innovation and investment all aligned towards a low carbon economy, to get our education system aligned in communities. So all of these things. So I came up with these 10 building blocks, and they're really the foundations. So we need to get these foundations in place, and then it'll be much easier for businesses and individuals to buy green products. And as I say, without that, if you want to be green just now, then it's quite difficult. you might have to do a bit of self-sacrifice compared with other people. And whilst, maybe 10 or 20% of people are willing to do that, the majority aren't. So the current system isn't working. So we need to do fairly radical change to get everybody to go green. And I don't think that's going to be difficult. It just needs government to regulate, businesses to follow those regulations, and then that offers consumers much better choices.
Slightly off topic. In days before the pandemic, I would put 10, 12, 15,000 miles a year on my car. But during the pandemic, and even now, which that hasn't lessened, I've had my car now 2 years. I have 4,000 miles.
Right.
And interestingly, and there's probably a novel buried in here. Interestingly, there's extra 20, 25,000 miles that I didn't drive. My wife and I look at each other and say, there's no place we really need to go. There's nothing, it's fine. So in other words, what I'm saying, futuristically, I never even conceived of the notion of an electric car. And why not? We ain't going anywhere. We go to the market, to the post office. I mean, it's a whole new way of life. And I'm saving 25, 30,000 miles, me, one person, of gas over the last couple of years. Anyway, it's an interesting thought, but to be talked about. Next, well, who's the best? Who is the best to tackle climate change? Governments, businesses, individuals, combinations. Is it the fault, basically, of government that has led us down this path?
It's very easy to blame governments, but governments, certainly in democratic countries, are there because they're elected by the people. And from what I hear from politicians is they're not under pressure from the electorate to be more radical in green policies. That's a fairly shocking thing to say, but that's what politicians are saying, even in the United Kingdom.
Wow.
So can you blame governments? I'm not too sure. People need to put pressure on governments and elect people who want to act on climate change. So there's still a lot to do out there. But in terms of whose fault it is, other people blame big business. And maybe 70% of carbon emissions are created by business, so it'd be very easy to blame them. But again, they're just responding to what consumers demand or are asking for. So an oil company is drilling for oil and selling us oil because we want to drive cars a long distance. So is it the business to blame, or is it the individual to blame? And I guess there's no answer to that question. So what I'm saying in my book is we need governments to act, we need businesses to act, we need communities to act, and we need individuals to act.
Okay.
But fundamentally, governments need to set tough regulations that business will then take forward. And that's not a problem for business. Well, they usually complain about new regulations, but once the regulations are in place, those complaints soon disappear and they just go on with delivering services to the public.
We touched on this next question before we went on air. What individuals can do, like changing their diet, where they choose to live, and what they buy. I did say I'm very proud of this. The diet thing, long before I read your book, I changed my diet in 1975 because of the environment. Mm-hmm. I stopped eating anything with 4 legs. I'm not perfect. By the way, I did read this carbon shot. There's so much in my head, Neil. I can't help it. I looked at this carbon chart. Obviously meat has the biggest carbon footprint. lamb and meat and lamb, but pretty high up. And you ruined my night last night, Neil, when I saw on that chart that coffee and chocolate are really high up on the carbon footprint. But with me, who stopped eating everything with 4 legs, my message out there, and it's now been 46 years, is it really worked for me, that changing of the diet and respecting the planet.
Yes.
I'm walking around with 0 coronary artery plaque at my age, and which means these vessels up here that feed my brain cells are got to be pretty open. So for me, that was a wonderful undertaking. But so, I mean, what can folks do? You know, diet and purchasing and where do you want to live, etc.
Yes, they are. I think the 3 areas that individuals can make a change very quickly. So starting with diet, as you've been suggesting, it's cattle and sheep that have a disproportionate impact on the environment. And that's because they're ruminants and they burp out methane, and methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. And then, of course, it's the dairy products that come from cattle, from milk. And so that's why your chocolate has a high carbon impact, because there's a lot of milk in chocolate, or in most chocolates.
Wow.
And in my book, I only have 2 graphs because I'm trying to make it easy to read, but sometimes a graph says 1,000 words. And I do have one graph that shows the impact of beef, dairy, etc. on your diet in comparison to eating fruit and vegetables and grains. There's just a massive difference, you know, up to 50 times higher carbon emissions. So that's a huge thing you can do, is to not necessarily go vegan or vegetarian, but certainly to eat less meat and to stop eating meat kind of every day, 7 days a week. So diet's a big thing. The other thing I think is really important and people don't talk about is where you choose to live. So if you compare somebody who lives in a suburb or a greenfield site out of town, they've got a great big house with a detached house, perhaps 2-3 cars in the driveway, perhaps 2 or 3 bathrooms, 3 or 4 bedrooms. You know, to some people that's the dream. But by living out of town in a residential neighborhood where there's not many people and there's no public transport, so you're completely dependent on your car. Your children probably have to be driven to school. You probably need to drive to the shops, to the cinema, and you know, there's so many consequences from that. If you compare that with somebody who lives nearer the centre of town, maybe in a smaller flat, or certainly near public transport, they can walk to the shops, they can walk to the school, it's probably healthier. There's enough people living around about to make public transport viable. So there's so many beneficial impacts from that. It's not something everybody wants to talk about, but it's an important consideration.
Okay. In the book, you mentioned rewilding. Can you explain that?
Well, rewilding is a term for recreating nature the way it perhaps was before humans interfered. I mean, there's a variety of definitions, but that's basically what it is. So humans have destroyed 90% of kind of the land areas, natural, you know, the way it was before humans were there. And a lot of that's for agriculture, a lot of it's for pasture, going back to the impact of grazing, but also urban expansion. And of course, that's also resulted in a huge loss of carbon dioxide, because as you cut down trees, the carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. So there's a carbon reason for rewilding, for reforesting, but also a nature reason. In the UK, we've destroyed over 90% of our wetlands. And, we need to recreate some of that, because so much of our, well, obviously all the wildlife depends on that, but our human lives depend on that. There's now a complete loss of insects in many parts due to spraying of pesticides. And that's not good, because insects pollinate crops. And if there's no insects, then there's nothing for the birds to eat. And so it affects the food chain all the way through. So eventually these losses will come back and bite us. But yeah, I'd like to recreate some of that wild land.
Okay. All right, so kind of winding down, because I know you have stuff, and there's a major conference coming up in November, actually in your backyard. COP26 is coming up. It's an environmental conference. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So COP26 in Glasgow is the 26th Conference of the Parties. That's a grand name for a 26th United Nations Climate Conference. And on average, there's one a year. So we've been having these climate conferences for 26 years.
Wow.
And it's got to be said, they've been a failure, because carbon emissions have continued increasing for the last 25 years. So some of the conferences, the politicians come away and claim some sort of success. So the last big conference was in Paris in 2015. And that was deemed by everybody to be a success, really because for the first time, all the countries came on board and signed up to some action. So that was a first. But it's a voluntary agreement. Kind of each government volunteers how much they want to cut their carbon emissions by. And the problem is when you add up what these countries are planning to cut, or sometimes it's not even a cut, sometimes it's just a slowed down increase, then it's not enough. Our climate's still spiraling out of control. So to me, this COP26 is the big conference. It's really the last chance for the governments to agree on something sensible that will prevent our climate going into irreversible change. So yes, COP26, Glasgow, November. You're going to hear a lot about it over the coming weeks.
Yeah. I could ask you a million more questions, but I'm not. You can tell folks, please, where this is available. I got this on Amazon myself. It's the easiest way to get it is Amazon.
So yes, if you live in the United States, then and other parts of the world, it's available on Amazon and on Kindle. If you live in the United Kingdom or Europe, then I can post you a copy that's signed. And to access that, have a look at my website, which is www.carbonchoices.uk. You can also see the testimonials and my blog. So there's a lot more on my website.
I'm going to send you my testimonial as we wind down. I had asked Neil before we went on air. As I'm reading this, I think I mentioned this at the outset. I'm taking notes, but I didn't know what to do anymore, because every sentence you wrote required a note, and it wasn't very time favorable. I mean, I'm just taking notes on everything you wrote. So, but Neil did agree that when I do finish and I have my 30 or 40 or 50 pages of notes, that he might come back here and we can talk about some of the things that I extracted from the book. You know what, Neil, I probably won't. And I'm absorbing a lot of the things that the little group that I joined up with you all, as I'm plunging into and reading this stuff, I don't think I'll ever be the same. So you've been transformative, and I wanted to also thank you for your time, for your graciousness to give your time and your passion and thank you for being you, and spreading this word, because it really needs, not for us, but for the kids and their kids kind of stuff. So please do come back. And I thank you so much for being here.
And I think it's worth saying that climate action isn't something to fear. It's a better world we're trying to create, one that's cleaner, less air pollution, warmer homes, less need to drive everywhere, so less car dependency, and good communities, better places to live. So these are all things that are worth doing regardless of climate action. So
well,
yes, do it.
that's a nice positive way to end. It really is. So please do come back. And I would love you to come back and we talk about this some more. So thank you so much, Neil, and to be continued.